You know the old line, niches make riches. Everybody thinks they're going to live until they're 120. So they have until they're 119 to get everything together. But of course then 75 happens and there's a stroke and all of a sudden everything changes and it's too late. Like financial advising, I would imagine, once you need it, it's too late to get it.
I find people who are really successful, they're curious.
For me, it's really, I wish I had understood real estate better.
One kind of core question. If you could go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would that be? Thank you for joining PlanAssist Podcast, where we try to help you make better financial decisions. And it's really built on three core principles: have a plan, be diversified, and seek counsel. And as I interview different people, I try to build it around kind of those three big principles, though we won't go necessarily in detail on any one of them, or sometimes we'll go really deep on one of them. But the goal is to help you basically make better financial decisions as you get closer and closer to retirement. Today, I'm super excited to have Geoff Hoatson on. He's the founder and CEO of Family First Firm in Orlando. It's a law firm that focuses on elderly law, but also other law. So it includes businesses, et cetera. And he helps families basically navigate legal and financial challenges for the aging. It includes Medicare, veterans benefits, estate planning, trust, a lot of that stuff that people who have accumulated some assets really need to pay attention to. He's built the firm with really one main mission in mind. How do you help seniors and their loved ones kind of manage the risk that comes with poor planning? Now, Geoff's been recognized as a super lawyer's rising star for several years in a row, but he's also been named on the Inc. 5000's fastest growing company. So I'm super excited to have on the podcast today. So with that, did I miss anything, Geoff, or do you want to add anything to that?
I don't know, man. Longtime Central Floridian, wife, two daughters. Nothing too exciting.
Awesome. So I always like to start off, or not like, I do. I start all my podcasts off with one kind of core question. If you could go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would that be?
That's an interesting one. It's probably a little different than what I imagine a lot of your other guests are going to say. For me, it's really, I wish I had understood real estate better. I have owned a number of commercial pieces of property where our firm operated out of.
Mhm.
One, two, three, I think four different offices. And the problem is that, we bought an office, we moved into it, we outgrew it. So then we had to go buy another one and then outgrew it and sell and buy and sell and buy and sell. We've done that with our houses over the years, as far as our residential homes as well. We sold the home we were in and then bought a new home. I've since come to learn that lots of people will keep those homes, refinance, do a refi cash out, keep it as an investment property, whether it's a home or a commercial building or any of that sort of stuff. And I realize I think I could be in a much better financial situation now had I understood how real estate works and those sorts of things back when I was doing this. Ultimately now I'm actually renting for our commercial space. Got sick of outgrowing spaces and I said, I'm going to rent space where if I need to grow, I can just take more. I don't have to sell something again and change my marketing and change our location and all the headache. So we did that. We took, the space that we're in. It was Ruth's Chris, their headquarters before they got purchased by Darden 2 years ago. And so when Darden picked them up, they moved all of their execs out to the Darden headquarters. And so this place was sitting really with a skeleton crew. I just sold my, 100 square foot building. And we found this space. We were able to negotiate a lease and we came in here and it's about 14,000 square feet or so. And then in the last year, then we took another 5,000 square feet upstairs. So, it was well thought out. Now that I get, maybe the problem is that there's no more space in the building. So if we do outgrow this, we're running into similar issues again, but I don't think that's likely.
Gosh, you've got a fantastic operation. How many attorneys and kind of people do you have in your group?
It's a great question. We've been doing making a lot of changes recently to our organization. I think we're somewhere in the low 50s in total in terms of total headcount. Of that, I think there's 9 attorneys, and then whatever the difference would be of non-attorneys. The areas in which we practice can be very heavily done by, I don't want to say done, but a lot of the stuff that can be produced within the organization, especially on the Medicaid or the probate side of things, definitely requires attorney oversight, but doesn't necessarily require the attorney to be involved on a day-to-day. Some of that stuff is very administrative. And so, we have non-attorneys doing that where the attorneys are handling really the legal aspect of those practice areas.
So I took kind of the summary and off of your website, obviously, so you need to summarize when you do an introduction, but it's obvious with that big of an operation, you're much broader than just elder law. It becomes a broader offering focus than
Surprisingly, not really.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
The old line, niches make riches,
Yeah, that's true.
so to
That's
speak.
absolutely true.
But no,
But
but I mean, we're a few things that make us kind of fortunate. Obviously, we're here in Florida, and we have a
uh
very aged population here, who need a lot of the help that we provide. But I will say that unfortunately, for community, society, whatever. Fortunately, though, for our organization, elder law is a very underserved area of the law. There are far more people that need our services than we could ever help. And we are the largest elder law firm in the state of Florida. Even at a 50 whatever, 253, 54, I don't know how many people we are today, but we're always recruiting and trying to
yeah,
place
no,
people.
exactly.
But the bottom line is, even at that, I mean, it's not large. I mean, it's a decent medium-sized business, but I mean, we're not the Morgan and Morgans of the world or anything like that, with thousands of lawyers. That's not us, and I don't, think that'll ever be us. But, you know, so
So So elder law, one of the challenges I have as a financial advisor. So as my clients age and get closer and closer to retirement, my business primarily is focused on that kind of 50-year-old and then kind of into retirement.
yeah.
Obviously, I still help them with the retirement, but the majority of them are kind of in that age group. And one of the things that I find frustrating as a financial advisor is the procrastination is probably the best way
Mm.
to word it, right? I mean, hey, I need help with this. I need to put something in a trust. Sometimes it's too late by the time someone does something, right? I mean,
Yeah.
do you find that to be your biggest challenge as an attorney? I got to think most financial advisors would agree with what I just said.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Oh,
probably our biggest challenge.
you know, everybody thinks they're going to live until they're 120. So they have until they're 119 to get everything together. But of course, then 75 happens and there's a stroke, and all of a sudden everything changes and it's too late. And like financial advising, I would imagine, once you need it, it's too late to get it. Almost always. There are very few exceptions there. And the one exception I will say is Medicaid. There are ways that people can get Medicaid even in a crisis. When you're already in that nursing home, you're already receiving care in the home, you're in a hospital, there are ways of getting it.
Okay. That's good to know.
Generally, though, they're not as good as if you were planning ahead, like most things in
Yeah,
life.
exactly.
Planning always beats reacting.
Right.
And we do try to help people understand the value of planning it, but unfortunately, I think the other piece of it is people don't like thinking about the stuff that we're helping them plan for.
And the more drama they've had in their lives, the less likely they want to sit down, right? And what I mean by that is if someone has been married one time, has two kids, minor drama, pretty easy to sit down with an attorney and have some of those financial conversations. But if someone's been married, once or twice, has multiple kids from multiple marriages, has, kind of the mine, yours, ours situation,
Yeah.
those conversations are hard. They need to be had, but they're more difficult.
It is. And, I think people avoid them because they feel like it's going to be too challenging.
Yeah,
Say, oh, geez, like I have to think about all that. Oh, I get it. People don't like dealing with difficult topics.
right,
And, at the end of the day, a lot of people think that what they're talking about with us is death. That's not a fun topic to think about.
right.
Now, my perspective is, a lot of the things that make people uncomfortable about talking about these topics, really is kind of the unknown. What will happen? If I were to pass away, what happens to my family? What happens to the stuff I leave behind? Those sorts of things where, I think obviously everybody wants to be here. People want to be alive generally. But, the thought of being gone is really more about the people that you leave behind and kind of all of that, the mess that's left and the people that you care about. And my perspective is always, well, if you truly care about them, if you want to make sure everything's okay, that's why you got to plan, right? Because if you don't plan, now you're really leaving a big mess. But if you do put something in place, well, now at least you can kind of live your life knowing that, God forbid something does happen to you, your family's okay.
And one of the things that I just pound into people about planning, that does not mean the 1990s plan that everyone has in their brains where they went to a financial advisor and they did this 48-page PDF document that then they left and they go and put it in their drawer and they don't do anything with it. I said, planning could be as simple as here's where I am now, here's where I need to go, and I need to get these 5 or 6 things done in the next 6 months. Yeah, you might need a broader plan at some point, but planning is more about just thinking and kind of accomplishing something very specific. But before I kind of get on to the next question, I want to make a comment and hear your views on this. Another thing that I get in these conversations with clients is they'll say, well, if I'm dead, it doesn't matter, or I put something on my will. And I say, you understand that having a will, and as crazy as it is, we still have 50% of the population without even a simple basic document as a will.
Yeah.
But I'll tell clients, I'll say, you don't understand. It's not even about when you die. What happens if you get Alzheimer's? It's those other documents that go with the will, right?
Absolutely.
It's the healthcare power of attorney. It's the financial power of attorney.
Mhm.
And they just, for some reason, can't kind of comprehend that. I said, those are probably way as important or maybe more
Yep.
so.
I absolutely agree with you. When I talk with people about it, I oftentimes tell them, we can talk about your stuff and we can talk about you. But I think you would probably agree with me that you are more important than your stuff. And
Exactly.
wills are for your stuff after you pass away. Those documents you're talking about, advanced directives, things like, healthcare documents, medical, financial powers of attorney, that sort of stuff. That's for you while you're alive. That's to make sure that you're okay. In fact, in my firm, we've made it a practice that we don't charge for those documents. They're included with everything we do. So if you get a will, you're getting advanced directives. If you hire us for Medicaid, you're getting advanced directives. I don't want people trying to make a financial decision on this stuff because it's so important. I'm going to give you what you need.
And it is so important. Like I have a client right now going through it with his mother. And even though she doesn't have dementia, she is very health challenged. And
Mhm.
had he not had power of attorneys, because they're like, well, she needs to make those decisions, but with the power of attorney, he can make her life less stressful and help have some of those conversations that in today's world, without those legal documents, you're just going to sit in a waiting room.
Yeah. There's that, or you hire an attorney and you go through an expensive and lengthy guardianship case in order to be able to make those decisions. If you have a loved one who's lost the ability to make decisions for themselves, you either have a power of attorney or you go get guardianship. And those are your only options. And a guardianship will run you anywhere between 5 to 10,000 bucks in the first 45 to 60 days.
Wow.
It's
So,
incredible how expensive it is.
exactly. Holy Moses. So that kind of takes me naturally to the next discussion that people will constantly hear. If they have a decent amount of assets, they're constantly kind of bombarded with get a living trust, get a living trust, get a living trust, right? And I tell clients, I say, you need to talk to an attorney. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give you legal advice,
Yeah.
but you need to really think through what are you trying to do with that? What are you trying to accomplish? And in some cases, a living trust is perfect. Other cases, a living trust, you don't necessarily need it. But one thing a living trust does do is it covers those things really well, right? Those pre-directives. It doesn't give you healthcare power of attorney. You still need that.
Right.
But the financial power of attorney kind of gets picked up with the living trust, right? Or not.
So it's interesting because it does if all the assets are appropriately moved into that trust,
Oh my gosh,
which
yes.
is the biggest challenge, truly.
And that's a big if.
And I'm sure you're aware, you probably had plenty
Yes.
of clients come to you, they're like, I got a trust, but there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
And it's empty. And you say, well, okay, great, but we need to actually move this stuff into the trust, and then you might be retitling accounts into the trust name or making trust beneficiaries or things like that. And we run into that a lot. That's actually another thing that we just include in our firm is if you hire us for a trust, we're doing all the retitling for you. For your listeners, a trust is kind of like think of it like a safety deposit box, right? It only protects what's inside of it. And so if nothing's inside of it, it's an empty safety deposit box doesn't help you.
Right.
And so, we actually do all of that for our clients because, I'm a very results focused person, meaning I don't think anyone ever came to me because they wanted a trust. People came to me because they want what a trust does, which is avoid probate, protect their loved ones, provide easy administration of their stuff while they're alive if they lose capacity to make decisions for themselves, and provide easy administration after they pass away, save some time, money, headache, all of those things. But the only way that happens is if their trust is properly funded. Because there's lots of lawyers out there who will set up a trust. They won't put anything in it. They'll put together what's called a pour over will, which is like the typical companion will to a trust that says anything that isn't in the trust goes into the trust after I pass away. But as we know, wills are your ticket to probate, including pour over wills, which means that even if you have a pour over will, it still has to be probated to move all those things into the trust. So now a lawyer just got to charge you to create the trust, and they're also going to get to charge you to do the probate afterwards because there's still going to be one if you
Which
don't
is
move your stuff into it.
which is 3 to 5%, right?
3% is the presumed
Typical.
reasonable in Florida. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
go to California, you can get all the way up to 5.
Still, I mean, you have a million bucks, you're talking about some serious money.
It's great for me.
I have like an embarrassing, and I'm actually embarrassed to share it, but
No.
this goes to clients. I had a new client come on board about a year and a half ago, and I set up the account, and she has some children, and I did transfer on death, which is
Yeah.
also we can have that conversation, make sure that assets go to the kids.
Yep.
Pretty non-drama, not a lot of drama in their lives, not multiple marriages or anything like that. So I said, well, we'll just set it up individual, and
Yeah.
so we're going through and doing like normal stuff financial advisors do, depositing
Yeah.
checks and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, I see some document that had a will, had a living trust on it. And I called her up and I said, what? I said, I just saw where you have some document in living trust. And she goes, oh
Hmm.
yeah, and I have a trust. And I said, but why don't we have, and I have substantial assets, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
on this side. I said, we should have those assets in the trust, not in your
Hmm.
individual name.
Yeah.
And she says, oh yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. And
Yeah.
again,
Thank God you
it's,
caught it.
it's super
No.
easy to do. Yeah, no, I'm glad that I did. And it's really
Yeah.
easy if you have an accountant, Charles Schwab, Pershing, Merrill Lynch, Fidelity. They have made it really simple to title stuff with the trust, but you kind of have to mention it,
Hmm.
and my job's to ask enough questions where I identify it. That's why I was kind of
Yeah.
embarrassed that I didn't kind of catch it, but I didn't do that. And so like I told her, I said, that's my fault. I should have spent more time kind of doing a process, but I did catch it. And,
Yeah.
but to your point, people don't think it's that important, I guess. I mean, no one's kind of just pounded into them that we want everything in the trust if you have a trust.
Yeah. I've seen, statistics out there that say over 92% of trusts have nothing in them.
Is that
Because
right?
yeah. Well, I mean,
Holy
I will tell
Moses.
you, I mean, so you're a financial advisor, so it's not as difficult for you. But for attorneys who would
Mhm.
do the retitling, it's actually a good amount of work. And I think most lawyers just don't want to deal with it. They just want to, kind of do the transaction, get the trust set up. Trust is set up, go ahead and move on.
Yeah.
And they don't want to jump through the hoops of actually doing all the retitling. But again, the way I look at it is nobody cares if they have a trust. They want their trust to work. And the
No,
only way
that
I can make sure that happens is if I do it for them.
So, so with that, let's go to kind of the next conversation. So that was a really good
Sure.
conversation. I appreciate your input on the trust and the importance of a trust for some people, right? So before we leave trust, that doesn't mean every person should just go out and set up a living trust, right? I mean, if someone has, lives, they need to talk to an attorney, and a good attorney will sit down and based on their lives, they may say a will and make sure that we have stuff titled correctly. I mean,
Correct.
that's another kind of the next step is without a trust, you can still get a lot of stuff done correctly if you title stuff, especially in Florida where we get to do transfer on death.
Absolutely. There's no, unfortunately, no right or wrong. Like, how do I want to say this? There's no right answer or panacea. It's not everyone needs a trust. I can't even tell you, hey, if you're under this dollar amount or over this dollar amount that you need or you don't need. I mean, it really becomes very fact specific because at the end of the day, it's about everyone's goals and what are you
That's
trying to
right.
accomplish? And, sometimes I need a trust to accomplish those goals. Sometimes I don't. This morning I met with a couple who were very concerned about protecting their stuff from Medicaid. And I sat down with them. I looked at the nature of their assets and how they were held. I said, you're actually in a pretty good spot. I wouldn't spend any money with me if I were you, trying to protect anything because I don't think you need our services for the protection that you're looking for. I think, should the time come that, the husband, he had been diagnosed with dementia pretty early, clearly because he was very engaged in the conversation, really leading the conversation. She told me he'd been diagnosed. I would never have known that.
Okay.
Uh, but ultimately, should he need, long-term care or something like that? Okay, then I said, then you probably come talk to me at that point. We'd be focusing on income preservation, and for her, that would be kind of the focus of the conversation at that point. But their assets were held in such a way that actually I was like, you don't need a trust. Now, normally, people that are worried about Medicaid and long-term care and that sort of stuff, they want to use like our fortress, for example, as a type of trust that we've set up, our family fortress. And that's all about protecting from long-term care and not just long-term care, it's really everything, elder exploitation, probate, medical expenses, you name it, anything that could financially devastate a senior. But in this case, I had to, I told these people, look, I wouldn't spend money with me. I don't think it's worth, I mean, here's what it costs, here's what it'll do, but it won't do a lot for you.
Yeah,
So, I
exactly.
think it is very fact specific.
And it's interesting because I actually see my job, and I think financial advisors' jobs have changed so dramatically over the last 20 years. The managing of the money is really commoditized. Well, I mean, with all honesty,
Sure.
I mean, that advisors don't necessarily want to hear that. They want to kind of do, okay, do this. But for all practical
Yeah.
purposes, the managing of the money, whether it's a 50-50, 60-40, it's more the soft stuff. And even though we can't necessarily do some of the soft stuff, it's important that we help and point them in the right direction, like titling of assets, like is a trust right and get them to an attorney like yourself. You know what I mean? I mean, I think that's like the biggest issue. And then they think that a trust kind of one last thing kind of on the trust. The trust is not some tax haven. It's a control document, right? It's more a control document than it is necessarily a tax document. Or is that not true?
It depends on the type of trust.
Okay.
So I think that's I will say that I think a lot of people, who aren't involved in the financial industry and just kind of like you're probably your listeners, hear the term trust and assume a trust is a trust is a trust. And I always like to say trusts are like automobiles. If I told you I needed to borrow an automobile for the weekend, your first question should probably be, well, what for? Are you
Right.
are you going drag racing? Are you taking a bunch of kids to youth group? Are you helping a buddy move out of his apartment? Are you moving like gold bullion? I mean, there's different vehicles for each purpose.
Yeah,
If I'm
that's a
drag
good point.
racing, I don't need a school bus. But
Okay.
also if I'm helping the buddy, move out of his apartment, like a Porsche isn't going to help me. And so, there are all kinds of different trusts and they all have different purposes. There are trusts that are designed like, we do a lot of Medicaid, as I mentioned. And, one of the issues with getting eligible for Medicaid is there's an income limit. 2901 gross monthly limit here in 2025. And if you have income over that, you can set up something called a qualified income trust. And you put your excess income in there, and now you're eligible for Medicaid. It sounds stupid. I agree. These are your government's rules. I don't create. This
Right.
isn't me. But those are their rules, and that's what you have to do. And I say, oh, well, we need a qualified income trust, and the family invariably says, oh, well, we have a trust. I said, well, I'm sure you do, but if the trust wasn't set up for the sole purpose of getting eligible for Medicaid when your parent is over the income limit, you don't have the type of trust that we need. And then
Yeah, that's a
you know,
good point.
and so you got stuff like, let's use the example like ILETs. Those don't
Okay.
really exist anymore, but I'm sure you probably had reason to
Oh
use them
yeah,
20 years
remember?
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
And
And
we
for
had
the
to memorize all that stuff,
yeah,
when we did
Crummy
our
Powers and the whole nine and
CFPs and
terrible.
all that stuff, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, for your listeners, an ILET is an irrevocable life insurance trust. And the purpose of that was to keep your life insurance proceeds out of your taxable estate when the estate tax exemption was a lot lower. Now it's 15 million per person. A married couple could give away as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. You're talking about 30 million for a couple they can give away during it life, 50 million for an individual, or at death. Like less than 1/10 of 1% of Americans have to worry about this stuff. So, we're not really setting up ILETs anymore, but those were absolutely for tax purposes.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
know,
no, that's a good
so
point.
but then you got stuff like, your typical like revocable trust, living trust that people set up all the time. Not a lot of tax benefit for that, especially not anymore. Back when the estate tax exemption was a lot lower, you would set up in this AB trust sort of setup, because then you could basically kind of get two bites at the apple from the estate tax perspective. So there wouldn't be as much taxes owed. The problem with that back then is it would put you in a situation where you would end up being subjecting your kids then to capital gains tax issues. But when you compared like a 15% long-term cap gains rate to a 40 or 45 or 50% estate tax rate, well, you're taking the long-term cap gain rate out every
Yeah, all
day.
day.
Like,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
50% compared to 50, yeah, no brainer. The problem now is people that still have those trusts and haven't
I actually
updated
have
them.
clients with still those still
Mhm.
exist. I mean, the AB
They do.
trusts,
Yeah.
marital
And now,
trusts, whatever you want to call them.
yeah. And now they're in a situation where they have subjected their kids to a 15% penalty when the option is 15% or zero on taxes. Because,
Yeah,
unless they got more than 15 or $30 million, they're not going to pay any estate taxes. But they didn't know that. Maybe their attorneys retired and didn't update them or tell them before they, maybe they just got it set up 20 years ago and said, I'm good. Not looking
yeah.
at this again. And so, there can be real tax consequences to this stuff. I mean, these days, when we're setting stuff up for people, there are generally no real tax benefits for it. We're setting it up so that is it efficient administration of their estate, it's avoiding probate, it's protecting their children's inheritance from creditors and predators and divorce and all that sort of stuff. But it's, definitely not about really saving on taxes for the majority of people.
Which is my experience.
Yeah.
But to your point, I actually need to probably do a little more stepping it up and start thinking about for some clients, there may be some real tax benefits if they get the right attorney and the right trust, based on kind of what
Yeah.
they're trying to do.
And especially if they have old trusts, sometimes doing, updating actually has significant tax benefits. It might say
Right.
their keeps 15% taxes because they've had the same document for 20 or 30 years.
Okay. So I guess the next kind of really big challenges that I see happen a lot of times is again, I kind of come back to procrastination. I
Mhm.
think that getting people to kind of get off center and come, do you do like the seminars? Sometimes that's a good way to get them off, podcasts, something like what are some of the best strategies that you've seen to help people kind of get there? Usually it's what I find is one person wants to do it and the other person not so much, right? And so you got to get kind of one of them, the one that's a little more hesitant, kind of on
Mhm.
board.
Yeah. My experience is generally that in maybe a more traditional marriage, the wife's the one that wants to get this stuff in place. The husband's like, yeah, we'll be fine. You know,
That's
I
all.
don't even.
That's so. I hate just putting everything kind of in a big category, but I find it really that's probably true. I mean,
Yeah,
and the husband really wants to play with the investments, and the
yeah,
wife wants to do more planning. I'm like,
yeah.
really.
Yeah,
So,
no, I'm with you. I would say we do the seminars. I go out and speak around. I'm on. We have our own podcast, the Elder Law Out Loud podcast.
which is how I
Uh,
found you.
oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do that. I also am on other people's podcasts as well, just kind of talking about this stuff. I really view my job as an educator. I don't really try to browbeat people or say, hey, you need to come do this. I more just say, hey, here's what you can do. To that end, also, I wrote recently this book called The Heirloom Journey. It kind of talks about some of the stuff that we do here, kind of how it works, thinking about long-term care, how you can use proper planning to really protect your assets from long-term care, trying to get that out. It really does, I'll say, kind of pull back the curtain, kind of show like a lot of secret sauce of how we do things. I've had people ask me like, why are you just giving it all away? I'm like, well, I'm not. The book does cost $16, but but ultimately, like I told you before, there's
Yeah.
far more people that need our help than I could ever help. And so I view this book as a way, hey, if I can't be the person to help you, hopefully you can take this information, maybe take it to another attorney or somebody, and you can get the help that you need. Because I know that, even as large as our firm is, I'm never going to be able to help everybody. You
Exactly.
even it's funny how people always think that, other people know about them or whatever. We've had billboards and wrapped vehicles and all sorts of stuff like that, but no one knows who we are. I mean, I read something that said in the last election, 5% of Americans didn't know who was running.
Gosh.
Billions of dollars spent on advertising, and
Yeah.
5% of the country didn't know.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So I mean, what chance do I have
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
educating everybody?
And that's kind of why I started this podcast was the same thing around even like the book I wrote was kind of plan assist around have a plan, be diversified, seek counsel. It,
Yeah.
it was designed to do exactly what you said. It's not so much that they need to come to me, but when they sit down with a financial advisor and attorney, they're more high level principles than go do this or go do that. And then
Mhm.
one of the three, so just to kind of finish this podcast up, I want to kind of hit on these and get your input on them. So when I started down this path, I knew I needed to come up with something simple and something that really impacted people or had a view. And I started interviewing some of my best clients and kind of, well, what are some of the principles that they followed? And it was interesting because I found some common denominators along there, but it was six, seven, eight, nine, number. And then I saw Charlie Munger on a
I love
Berkshire
him.
Hathaway. Oh my gosh, I love that guy. So he's
He's
doing a
amazing.
Berkshire, and someone asked him, what is the most important or the best investment lesson you've ever learned? And he says, with no pause, I mean, just boom, gets right into it. He says, invert everything. And what he did is he got into his story around he was a weatherman in the army. And when he came out, he realized as he was giving weather advice to these pilots, the good weather was irrelevant to the pilots. He needed to tell them the bad stuff that was out there. And so like there's
Mhm.
thunderstorms, there's ice, there's high winds. He said that was the value that I offered the most to those pilots. And he goes, when I left the army and went in and started my real estate, I started to do the same thing. I didn't just look at the best, I looked at the worst. So my point is, when I kind of came across these three principles, I realized when I looked at my best clients and clients who were really successful, they were kind of all over. But when I looked at people who should have had financial success, should have been fine, that group, it was really clear that they didn't do three things. They didn't have a plan. They just went and bought stuff. Just, oh, I'm driving by a car dealership and literally would pull in and pull out with a new car, right? I mean, no planning at all. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that sounds ridiculous, but it's shocking how many people will actually do stuff like that or some variation of it. The diversification is more strategy. So a lot of people will be concentrated, but they won't be necessarily diversified their whole lives. But
Mhm.
early in their career, in their investment career, they might have some concentration, but they need a strategy around. And then finally, which is where I'm going with you, is seeking advice. Now, whatever people want to call seeking advice, I get feedback where they should call it something different. But what I mean by that is I find people who are really successful, they're curious and they don't see seeking advice as something controversial or even combative. They don't, it's not like a sales process. They'll just call and say, hey, Geoff, hey, what do you think about that? And then you just like, hey, or you're at a cookout or you're at a whatever. And I find that people who are successful are just incredibly good at getting input on making financial decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure they know it. Right. I
Right.
mean, I don't think they can even explain kind of how they make financial decisions. So I guess where I'm going with this or kind of to finish up is what's kind of your experience on the seeking advice. I mean, what's your opinion, I guess, is more of that. What do you think about what I just said and kind of where do you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think definitely when you talk about seeking advice, and talk about whether it's directly from a professional or just, starting to ask people around them, I agree with you that I think that successful people tend to be curious people.
Exactly.
They're just curious about life in general and like to understand things and get other people's opinions and feedback because I don't think any one of us has it all figured out. You know, um, that said, I do believe that we live in an age of specialization. And, certainly that, while you can go to, I'll use an example, your friend who's a criminal law attorney and ask that person about Medicaid, and he'll probably tell you, he or she will probably tell you, you can't get Medicaid. Medicaid's too hard to get. They don't know. And I always like to kind of draw an analogy between doctors, where you wouldn't go to a pulmonologist, a lung doctor, to get your brain checked. You wouldn't go to a podiatrist that works on your feet to, have eye surgery, something like that. That we all kind of specialize, and that's the world that we live in now. And instead of these generalists, you really want to go to people that specialize in things. And I think that's just true and becomes even more important the higher the stakes. And so, if you're planning for retirement, this isn't something you should be doing with Chat GPT. You probably need to go to someone like you who has the ability and the experience to guide them through not only what investing looks like, but also kind of like the whole bigger, broader picture of, financial preparation, I guess I'll say, as you move towards retirement. And it's true as well of as planning, for I'll say your golden years from a legal perspective. That your divorce lawyer from 20 years ago probably isn't the guy to be talking to when you're worried about, getting your will together or power of attorney or planning for, maybe a trust or something like that. They may have very outdated, and we see this regularly, unfortunately, very outdated templates that they had 30 years ago, 20 years ago from their previous role, in a big firm downtown or something. They assume, this stuff probably doesn't change. It does.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah. And so, I do think that finding counsel, finding experts to provide guidance, when the stakes get high, I always like to say, you don't go straight to the clearance rack for your wedding dress.
Right.
Stakes are high.
Yeah, no,
You want something that's going to be right for the
and
occasion.
and people don't realize, professionals, people in professions, they don't realize how nonchalant they'll give an opinion that person will take as fact, right?
Yeah.
So again, successful people have learned to ask questions and then they can put those categories, somehow they naturally put those into a category of that's really not all that important, or that helps me ask the right questions. So like I'll have clients that'll come and they'll say, well, I use ChatGPT a lot. And I said, it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I said, there's nothing wrong with using it. What
Yeah.
it'll help you with is it'll help you clarify what questions you really need to ask me.
Mhm.
And it'll
Yes.
really help you clarify where we go and how deep do we go. So
Yeah.
I'm not an anti-ask a bunch of questions from other people, but
Right.
to your point, when it comes to actually making the financial decision, you need to make sure that you've kind of thought through all the best case, worst case, which was my Charlie Munger course. That really is to
Yeah.
summarize what Munger did his whole life. Was when he made a decision, before he made it, he was really clear on best case, worst case, and likely case.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
all right. Well, with that, do you have anything to add to your book? Hold your book
Oh,
up so we can kind of
Heirloom Journey on Amazon. I think it's 15.99.
okay.
Really major focus is protecting everything from the risks of aging. There are a lot of ways that aging can financially devastate seniors, and this is the Floridian's Guide to protecting everything from it. So
And it's
on
specifically
Amazon.
written for Floridians, which is awesome, right? I mean,
Yeah,
holy Moses.
so a lot of the strategies and things we have here don't exist in other states. And so this is very specific to Florida. If you're a listener, if you have someone who's not in Florida, I probably wouldn't buy the book.
Yeah, but that's
Unless you
tr
have a loved one here or something, maybe. But yeah,
but that's true with those Northerners who've moved down here that have
right.
trust and wills and trust set up north. They need to rewrite those for Floridian law,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Our laws are very different here. And a simple, just as an example, if you have a will that says, hey, the house is going to be sold and the proceeds split between my kids,
Mhm.
that now will subject a house that would be exempt of probate, so the attorney can't charge on it. Creditors can't come after it because homestead is completely exempt of creditor claims in Florida. The proceeds of a sale is not. So if your will directs that a home is sold, now all of a sudden creditors, it's all available to all of them. The attorney gets to charge 3% on that. It's a huge mess just because of one line. Where here in Florida, our wills generally say the homestead goes to my kids. It doesn't say it's
Gonna be
sold and the
sold.
proceeds
Yeah.
distributed to my children because, in other states, that's actually easier. You just have the executor sell it and then distribute the proceeds. That's easy. But you don't have any of that protection. So something as simple as that, poof, huge headache, major problems. Creditors could be taking the entire value of the home.
And especially if one of the kids is a little bit financially challenged
Yeah.
and the other's not, all of a sudden you've just created a huge mess for your loved ones that you
Yeah.
probably thought you were leaving them a nice, clean, easy distribution process.
It's terrible. Yeah. So
So to finish this podcast, please, one of the biggest things that people have to do is make sure that though you do have to save money, we have to do the investments, we have to do all the financial things. You also, in order to protect those assets, need to make sure we have stuff titled correctly, make sure you have a will, make sure that you've sitting down with an attorney like Geoff and kind of talk through some of those painful conversations that might happen. But you got to have them because if you don't, it just turns into a mess.
yeah.
So, all right. Well, with that, I really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me, Geoff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great day. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.